Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 12th of March 2015. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish, and I'm afraid we're suffering a little bit of disease in the UK Column office. We believe it's Tombola 1C virus, which of course is particularly dangerous for two fat ladies or a full house. So we hope we'll have our staff back online tomorrow, but at the moment it will be myself and Nick Green behind the technical desk, but we have got a clip with Mark Anderson, who will be giving us a report from America, what's happening in the States, so stay tuned. Well, weather today, cold and grey in Plymouth, and we think much the same across the rest of the country. Political climate, very chilly and getting colder. Well, the UK Column is steadfastly stuck with the key fact that if Britain's politicians are prepared to engage in child abuse and cover up the abuse of children, then of course they cannot be trusted on any other matter, any other policy that they put forward. And the evidence is becoming overwhelming now that Britain's politicians have been involved in paedophilia, are involved in paedophilia, and abuse of children is being covered up with collaboration across Britain's police forces and of course the local authorities that have largely had control of children's homes. So let's have a look at what the Nottingham Post has to say. And here we are, a big headline that alleged former child abuse victim will stand against Nottingham City Council leader at the election. So the headline looks good. What are they talking about? Well, they're actually saying that Mickey Summers has been chosen as UKIP's prospective candidate for Labour councillor Mr. Colin St Anne's ward. Now, UK Column reaction to this is excellent. This is just what we need to see, which is people taking action themselves, and very brave Mickey Summers now engaging the leader of the council, which of course has paid out some £250,000 in compensation to the Beechwood child abuse victims, but has been losing records and of course denying victims the opportunity to tell their story. But let's look at how the Nottingham Post gently spins this story when we get into the text. We'll come back to this statement that of course it's alleged former child abuse victim Mickey Summers. Well, there's nothing alleged about Mickey Summers. He is a person, a real individual who's come forward to talk about the his horrific rape and abuse at the hands of the so-called children's care services. But of course, the paper being absolutely correct, it's all allegations. We don't really need to take it too seriously. These are just allegations. Well, it goes on to say that Mickey has previously accused Nottingham City and Nottinghamshire County Councils of destroying records, which he thinks would prove he suffered sexual abuse in local care homes in the 1960s. Well, this is nothing to do with accusations because the council is admitting that they cannot find records. So it's just worth reading this article to see how the local paper puts the nuances. They're not asking the key question as to what happened with these records, how were records able to disappear, and my view is that whilst they're promoting Mickey Summers, the tone of the articles is designed to gently undermine him, and they're not asking the right questions about what happened to these child abuse records. Well, if that's the situation in Nottingham, and we should remember that brave Melanie Shaw, who first blew the whistle on abuses of over 150 youngsters at Beechwood Children's Home, Nottingham, is still shut in a prison cell in HM Prison Peterborough. We did receive a very short letter from her yesterday, therefore we know that she is alive and well, thank goodness. But what has the British state done? David Cameron, Theresa May, Home Secretary Alison Saunders, head of the Crown Prosecution Service, they have locked a vulnerable child abuse victim and whistleblower, Melanie Shaw, back into a profit-making prison to make sure that she cannot tell the truth about the abuse of those youngsters. Against that background, we shouldn't be surprised that in the Hampstead case, which we reported yesterday, more information is coming to the surface. Here they are. Now, what these two youngsters talked about, absolutely horrific abuse at the hands of a group of people in the Hampstead area, which includes social services, teachers, people from the local churches, police officers and other officials. And we reported that the police had effectively taken no action. It was the Satanic Abuse Unit which we accused of this. We said that Metropolitan police officers who tried to help the family were threatened by other Metropolitan police officers, and we stand by that statement. But we did say yesterday that the police had leaked their interview with the children in which these youngsters supposedly retract their abuse statements. We now understand that it may not have been the police that have leaked that information. It could have come from other sources. The media has been totally silent. And of course, it's taken the alternative media to now put out the factual evidence. So online, and I warn viewers and listeners that if you look at this material, it's extremely graphic and very, very harrowing. But it is now online. What is now online, I beg your pardon, is the reports showing that these children were seriously sexually abused and physically damaged. We know they're likely to be mentally damaged. No ifs or buts, but surprisingly, or perhaps not in David Cameron's Britain, the police have not managed to pick anybody up. And it gets worse because it's taken Sky News to talk about a report that was buried in Lambeth Council in which sexual assaults and rapes, including of children and animals, was taking place on Lambeth Council properties in the 1990s. And the man in the picture who had said that he was going to blow the whistle on this was later killed. Now, we understand that Met Police Operation Trinity is picking up on this. Can we have any confidence in this team as a result of the cover-up over Elm House and the Northwest Hampstead child abuse? We don't think so. Well, it gets better because Rolf Harris, of course, who was given a soft sentence in open prison, is enjoying a £200,000 tax rebate. We just like to remind people that he was stripped of his CBE, but remember where Jimmy Savile was concerned, the government said it wasn't possible to strip Jimmy Savile of his knighthood. So interesting times. The government has still not revealed exactly who proposed people for these honours, and we seem to have double standards over Jimmy Savile and others with regard to stripping of honours. Can we trust the British government? Can we trust our security services? Well, let's remind ourselves of this little photograph. Bottom, we've got Mr. Heseltine, David Cameron and Matthew Byrne. Of course, let's remember that Matthew Byrne was a vicious paedophile involved in some horrific abuse, but also selected by the political charity Common Purpose as a future leader. Our question is, why did Britain's security services allow Common Purpose paedophile Matthew Byrne to get so close to the British Prime Minister? Remember, we've had politicians, Mr. Hammond in particular, praising our security services for their brilliant and excellent work. But it would appear that our security services are in fact so incompetent that Mr. Cameron can be placed at risk alongside a prolific paedophile, prolific and very dangerous paedophile. Well, if that's the case in UK, can we trust reports from our security services over Jihadi John? And Patrick Henningsen of 21st Century Wire certainly doesn't think so. And we encourage you to visit his site to have a look at this excellent analysis over the role of British security services and their close relationship with Mohammed Emwazi, the so-called Jihadi John. It now emerges that they knew of him over some 6 years what was actually going on in the background. So don't bother looking to the BBC for reports on Jihadi John. Do have a look at this 21st Century Wire article. Now, many people are saying to us, what can we do about this situation in UK? We're seeing the orchestrated breakdown of the country. The key is for people to understand who is doing it, how it's working, and to introduce some stability. And for that, we need to get back to the basics of the security of our constitution and indeed common law. So we're going to start off here by encouraging viewers and listeners to have a look at the British Constitution Group conference videos. And the latest one that we're posting is Guy Taylor, who of course has been revealing extraordinary information about the depth of the fraud and corruption and criminality in Britain's courts. Well, you can go on to the British Constitution Group website and call up those videos. We'd also give a heads up that John Shackleton, who has been doing such great work with Response, this is where we've got British people working together, not only communicating with each other, but getting out on the streets to help protect vulnerable people from the abuses of the criminals in Britain's government and establishment. John is appearing on Bastion Radio. Here's the details on screen, and I hope you'll go online and have a listen to his interview at 8 o'clock tonight. Now, as David Cameron and his ministers rip apart Britain's armed forces, we would just like to say, who was the mysterious artist at the British Constitution Group conference that left this wonderful sketch on one of the tables? We're fascinated by this very accurate drawing of a warship. We'd like to know who drew it and why. So if you know who the artist was, please get in touch. We'd like to learn more about you. And if you think the UK column is doing a good job, we need your support. We need more people to join and subscribe to our work to enable us to continue these news broadcasts, to continue publishing the UK column paper, and of course to continue to get out there investigating cases and producing the information in conferences such as just taken place with the British Constitution Group. So here is part of the adverts for the UK column from one of our own newspapers, and there of course you'll see some of the previous front page headlines that we've had, covering a range of things from the disgraceful expenditure of £47,000 a year on a banker, Marcus Agius, by the BBC, the fact that Oxford Safeguarding and Thames Valley Police covered up and then helped harass an Asian gentleman exposing child abuse, the Good Samaritan. We know who the domestic terrorists are. They're buried within our own government. George Osborne, the relationship between common purpose women in Oxford. And of course, we could solve all of the problems in the country by the reinstatement of the Bradbury Pound. That's the life and death headline. So we'll take a small break from the immediate studio and call in the interview with Mark Anderson. Well, we're going to bring in Mark Anderson of American Free Press, who's going to talk to us about what's been happening in America. And I know that he's been keeping a watchful eye on Congress and what Congress has to say, not only about Putin's Russia, but also Iran. And there's some quite interesting material happening with the Bank of Canada. So are you there, Mark?
Yes, I am, Brian. Glad to be on your show again.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure. We've got people saying in the United Kingdom at the moment that things are happening so quickly. We're seeing a whole range of rules, regulation, laws pushed through. We see David Cameron and Defence Minister Hammond are busy accusing the Russians of being the worst threat I think the West has ever seen. It's pouring in. Are you seeing the same sort of drive with propaganda and rhetoric the American side? That's my first question.
Yes, especially in Congress with regards to both Iran and Russia. the rhetoric is reaching really a fever pitch to justify not only harsher sanctions against both nations, but to lay the groundwork should military action be justified. And this is even while the U.S. is considering taking the lead in sending more troops to fight the so-called ISIS threat, which many now believe increasingly is a trumped up threat, and that Western intelligence is behind at least some elements of ISIS. So in a very comprehensive way, it's really being ramped up here. And so, hold on, just anyway. So it's a very difficult situation, and very volatile because you almost don't know what's going to happen next.
Yes, we sense the same thing. Something which we have finally got some senior military people who they seem to be thinking for the first time. But what's got them to that stage is that we see David Cameron taking the world stage, accusing President Putin of aggression over Ukraine, aggressive Russia, aggressive Putin. It goes on and on. But with his other hand, Prime Minister David Cameron has been slashing British military to the extent that the army, could it carry on a sustained overseas campaign of any scale? No, it couldn't. The Navy, we've lost our aircraft carriers. We've got no aircraft for those carriers being built. We're desperately short of escorts. So on one hand, we've got Britain's political leaders ramping up the call almost for war on a world stage. And with the other hand, they're actually ripping apart Britain's own military. And in the background, we've got European Commissioner Mr. Juncker, who's now calling for the creation of a European army.
Yes. You know, when I think back to my coverage of the Brookings Institution 2 years ago in May, the minister who was there from the European Commission, European government, the EU government, talked about the formation of a European army then. And I think we're now seeing, as you're saying, a more concrete development of that prediction. At that time, they also talked about making the European Central Bank the bank of last resort, like the Federal Reserve System. This was at the Brookings Institution in Washington in May of 2013. And in the military realm, I think we're seeing that come to fruition. And it may be, Brian, that the depletion of the British military may be preparatory for ceding control or releasing control of military functions to a more centralized unit like a European army. It would make sense in a way, in a twisted sense, for the British to diminish their army so as to grow a more centralized European army, much like the U.S. Putting so much eggs in the basket of NATO, a similar kind of situation. So we'll have to watch that, but that would make sense. That would be maybe one reason why the British military is being depleted.
Well, I would totally agree with that. And I would say that the UK column back in 2009, 2010 was absolutely warning that this is what was going to take place. And we're also warning that military type decisions, our strategic defence review, did not occur by debate in Parliament. It actually occurred by debate behind closed doors with such organisations as the Franco-British charity. So you had senior British military officers and politicians meeting in the residence of the British consul ambassador, I beg your pardon, in Paris, in order to set up our strategic defence evaluation. And that then led to the 50-year defence pact with the French, never debated in Parliament. Quite extraordinary. But if I may, I'll just pick up on your points about the security services perhaps being behind ISIS. The BBC's been pushing propaganda, talking about the creation of Mohammed Emwazi, the so-called Jihadi John. And the BBC refers to an organisation called CAGE, which is a funny little charity which has been pushing a lot of supposedly IS material, and yet they've been receiving funding from charities such as the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust, and also the Esme Fairburn Foundation. And I think this basically leads us into the fact that perhaps we sense George Soros and his money with organisations which are pushing for transformation and change.
Very interesting, Brian. The ISIS thing is indeed mysterious, and Western news consumers, UK news consumers in the US, wherever, should not buy the narrative that ISIS is simply this jihad against all that is good and pure, and we have to defend ourselves against this implacable foe at all costs. This is what the US is considering, with even more troops on the ground, in addition to the fact that we haven't pulled out of Iraq and Afghanistan yet all the way, even though we claim we almost have. And Paul Craig Roberts, a former U.S. Treasury official, has repeated that the Free Syrian Army of yesterday, many of them have become the ISIS or ISIL of today. And the cover story that they're attacking Iraqi cities and places within Syria or near the Iraq-Syria border is really a cover story, apparently, for the Free Syrian Army being relabeled ISIL and then attacking and trying to topple the Syrian president Assad through the back door. And I think what we're going to see to a large extent is that Assad's army, in trying to stop aggressive Islamic forces, has been pushed back by ISIL. So they've stopped Syria from doing something effective. And at the same time, the U.S. is lobbing bombs within the sovereign borders of Syria, within a sovereign nation with whom we're not at war. And how would any country like 1,000-pound laser-guided bombs dropped within its borders just to go after some ragtag ISIL units or whatever they claim to be? And in addition, Paul Craig Roberts has pointed out that the Toyota trucks, those tan-looking open-bedded trucks, look to be the same trucks that the U.S. bought for the Free Syrian Army and possibly for forces in Libya. And now those same trucks are being driven around by these ISIL masked marauders whose identity continues to confound and confuse many of us. But I think the Mossad and the CIA would have their fingerprints on this. The likelihood that they don't is infinitesimally small. And so we have kind of a trumped up enemy that now the British leaders and the American leaders are saying, oh, we've got this terrible threat. It's a manufactured threat, in my view, and I think that the facts will bear it out.
Well, Mark, thank you for that. Totally agree. I'll just bring this slide up on screen very, very quickly. This was an article that UK Column produced back in 2010. And what we were pointing out was that the whole disarming of Britain was being driven by the international banks because, of course, the big lie is there's no money. And we were saying, how is it that our chiefs of staff, senior military people, simply can't see that the whole issue is being controlled by the corrupt international banks? And of course, they're very happy with the wars overseas because that gives them future trade in arms. So when we look at this, this is not real politics that's being played out. It is like a very big, very deadly game where the public is just watching a puppet show, I think.
The banks are being used to kind of reorient the military. I won't elaborate, but to make it more of an arms trading and arms bazaar, arms sales, global arms trading kind of deal, and to make money on armaments and make it a huge global business as opposed to actually defending a sovereign nation like Britain.
Yeah. Well, just in a couple of minutes, we've got left with the slot, Mark. I know one of the subjects you've been looking at is the Bank of Canada. What's been going on there? Well,
the Crown has until late March, the Crown of Canada, an extension of Britain in a way, until late March, I believe it's March 27th, to counter this Comer lawsuit. And that's a Committee on Monetary Reform, or Comer. And essentially, the Bank of Canada Act, if adhered to, would allow the government of Canada to bring money into existence free of interest, free of debt. And the lawsuit is suing for that effect, to get back to the debt-free money that Canada had between the 1930s, the late 1930s, and about 1974. Kind of like the Bradbury Pound, in a sense, maybe not completely, but in a sense, you could say that between 1938 and 1974, Canada had something similar to Britain's former Bradbury Pound, or interest-free state money. Maybe not 100%, but the Comer lawsuit seeks to restore that debt-free money, thereby reinstalling the Bank of Canada Act that tried to enforce debt-free money. And the Crown of Canada has until March 27th to appeal this lawsuit. But recently, late this winter, the Canadian courts, actually ruled in favor of Comer, ruling that they can proceed, that they have legal standing, and that there is some sense to what they're saying because there's so much legal precedent for it. So we're keeping a close eye on that.
Right. Well, it just brings us back into this fascinating subject of the creation of money, which, of course, the international banks do out of nothing. We've had a little bit of a heads up that the Bradbury Pound is still valid currency today. I can't tell you more about that because we've got a little bit of a secret up our sleeve, but we think there's going to be some interesting announcements to do with the Bradbury Pound in the coming weeks. We're about at the end of our slot, Mark, I'm going to say. So thank you very much for joining us once again. And can I say that we are delighted that you're going to be a regular reporter now with UK Column. And it's absolutely great. Regular reports from the States, I think, is a good thing.
I look forward to it, Brian. Thanks for the opportunity. We'll see you next time.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. Well, there you are. Fascinating report from Mark in the States. And we're very pleased to say that we're going to be doing a regular slot with Mark, hearing about what's happening the other side of the pond, as they say. But let's remember, of course, a lot of policy that we're seeing, or the similarities in policies we're seeing between America and Britain is coming about from the centralised drive for a single system of government. And of course, it was Gordon Brown and President Obama that were both talking of their shared common purpose. So stay with us for more reports from the States. Well, back on the subject of the police, an interesting report by the BBC talking about police officers being forced into retirement after 30 years. We're particularly interested in this subject because what we see is the vital, experienced police officers who understand what policing should be about are being forced out of the police as fast as possible under the pretext of cost savings. So let's have a look at this article here. It says A19 police retirement, 1,086 officers seek compensation. What's been going on is that more than 1,000 police officers were forced to retire under the so-called 30 years service rule. And that was used by 15 police forces to make efficiency savings since about 2010. Now, what these police are saying is you discriminated against us on the basis of age, and they're now seeking compensation. Well, we think something rather different was going on because we think there are direct parallels with the fact that it's the experienced non-commissioned officers that have been forced out of Britain's military, greatly reducing the experience and professional base in the services. And of course, these were the key men that really allowed the military to operate. We think what's going on with the police is a similar system. The police as a law enforcing organisation are being undermined. We force out the experienced people and we bring in the new recruits who, of course, are the sort that believe that it's statute law, which only applies in Britain. So more there. We're hoping to get more information from the police themselves against this background now of the dismantling of true policing in Britain. Of course, there are people that have badly let the police down, and the Hillsborough report is coming to mainstream press and media at the moment. And we've got an extraordinary admission by the match commander, David Duckenfield, that basically Gate C was opened by the police and this then started to cause the problem inside the stadium. So the police were lying originally in all of the other inquiries into Hillsborough. This was the problem, the pressure of fans outside the ground. But what, as Mr. Dukenfield had to say, well, he told the jury he could not account for his movements for a period of more than 2 hours before he took up his position in the police control box on the afternoon of the semi-final as problems unfolded. We've heard some very interesting allegations that perhaps Mr. Dukenfield was not actually in a fit state to take up his post in the control box. But we haven't had further details on those allegations. But here is the account. I can't remember where I was for 2 hours on the day when some 96 people died. We would add to that the police lie and the British state have been covering up some 26 years. What hope have the victims of child abuse got at the hands of the corruption that infests the Conservative, Labour and Lib Dem parties? Because let's remember that our politicians were absolutely involved with the problems here. Where do we go to end the news? Well, we'd like to come back to this gentleman. Here he is, MP Sajid Javid, and we reported exclusively yesterday that great angst in the British military at senior level. This gentleman let slip that the plan was to further dismantle Britain's military, reduce numbers in order to ease Britain's military into the European control structure. And the analysis we're getting from people close to the high-level military at the moment is that basically if Britain was too strong militarily, Britain would have too much power within the EU. So Britain's military had to be further undermined and dismantled in order to allow that to happen. But we also pointed out that this Tory politician was promoting jobs. Well, he was promoting foreign car makers. He was promoting German firm Bosch. He was promoting armed forces personnel or recruiting at a time when, of course, his own government is sacking people from the armed forces. But we were particularly interesting that he was promoting what we are describing as poverty jobs, shelf stackers with the big supermarkets. And then, of course, we learned today this, that supermarket giant Morrison's is to close 23 stores, making 300 people redundant. But if you dig into the story, what is amazing is that it appears that Tesco has now got its men into Morrison's, and it's their advice which is leading to the close downs. So we've got Andy Higginson, who took over as Morrison's chairman in January, said last year's trading was tough, but we're still a good company, strong cash flow. But basically, Mr. Higginson, the former right-hand man to Sir Terry Lee at Tesco, also confirmed that Morrison will cut its dividend. And Mr. Higginson has also removed Dalton Phillips as chief executive, but Mr. Phillips' replacement, Mr. David Potts, is himself a former Tesco executive. So are we starting to now see Britain's food supply coming under the control of fewer and fewer global corporations, being helped, of course, by Britain's Conservative politicians on the lie that they're creating quality jobs? Well, if that's the Conservatives, we better look for their partners in collaboration, the Lib Dems. And a very interesting article here from The Telegraph, which is talking about an emerging scandal over dodgy donations to Nick Clegg's party, where a fake businessman was told to use backdated cheques and give money via relatives in order to hide his name. This is the meat of the article. The donation was sought by Ibrahim Taguri, the party's former chief fundraiser, who was standing for MP in Brent Central, and he boasts that his campaign is the third best funded in the country. So he's now stood down, but here we've got more allegations, corruption, wheeling and dealing around Nick Clegg. And let's not forget that, of course, Nick Clegg was the man who simply swept the abuse of women in his party under the carpet. And indeed, it was Nick Clegg that ran away from child abuse campaigner Bill Maloney, who said to him very clearly on camera, "What have you done to help deal with institutional child abuse?" So there is the state of Britain. Corrupt political parties, New Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem, hiding the truth at Hillsborough, hiding the truth of paedophilia, hiding the truth of the destruction of Britain's armed forces, sacking good, experienced police people. Are we at all surprised at the state of Britain? What can we do about it? Speak out, tell people what's happening, and encourage people to look, of course, at alternative sources of news, such as the UK column, to help get that truth spread far and wide. Can we stop what's happening? Absolutely, but it does require us to get out there and take action. For example, with Response or some of the other groups, it's not enough simply to email friends and complain. If you'd like to help us, please consider donating UK column, take up a subscription, or indeed do the same with the British Constitution Group. Thank you for joining me today. I hope we'll be back as a bigger team tomorrow. Bye-bye.